Yes, sir.
It's 33. It's 33 degrees in Wilno.
She's a bit mild, eh?
So everyone be aware, we may be live streaming. I'm just waiting for confirmation from Gwen.
Okay.
Okay, we are live. I'm going to call the meeting to order. At this time, I'd like to remind council and municipal staff that this meeting is being live streamed to the public. All council meetings are also recorded. Recordings will be available to the public on the township website. Physical attendance of the public at this meeting is not permitted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose of the meeting, the Council for the Township of Madawaska Valley deems it advisable to hold a special council meeting as allowable under section 3.6.4 of the procedural bylaw 2018-117. This meeting will be held electronically under the Municipal Emergency Act 2020 and Municipal Bylaw 2020-32, section 3.6.7. And we are, as I said, live streamed on the Township of Madawaska Valley YouTube account. So we'll start by moving to the adoption of the agenda for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020. I do have an amendment to the agenda. We are going to add under 13.1 in camera, number 5, which will be Wishart Law correspondence. 5A will be letter from Wishart Law to Council dated July 6, 2020 regarding June 2nd, 2020 Council direction. B, copy of a letter from Roger Paul to Wishart Law dated July 5th, 2020. And C, copy of a letter from Wishart Law to Roger Paul dated June 19th, 2020, and FIPA request March 26, 2020. So with that amendment, the recommendation is that the special council meeting agenda for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020 be approved as amended. Could I get a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Poplinski, seconded by Councillor Wilmer. All those in favor? And that's carried. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest today? Councillor?
None.
Councillor Poplinski?
Yes, 7.2.
Okay, thank you. And I imagine Sue will send you the form to fill in. I'm just making a note. Thank you. Is there any other declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing no further declarations. Today we'll move to delegations and presentations. And okay, so our first delegation, our only delegation is Doug DeLamater and Mike Bauk regarding shoreline road allowance of Chippewa Shores. Now, good, okay. I can see you, but you need to turn on. And but I cannot see the other member of the delegation. Are they present? I don't know where they are.
There, I've got the audio unmuted. No, I am the only living body for this presentation today.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed, Mr. DeLamater.
Okay. We will see. I thought a moment ago that I had everything right. I have a PowerPoint slideshow that is sitting here running, but you can't see it probably. Or can you? Oh, share the screen. There we go.
We actually can't see it.
All right. I now remember that we're supposed to share the screen. Can you now see it? Boom.
It's coming up. Yes.
Okay. Can you see me? Not that you want to, but.
Yeah, I think so. As you're speaking,
Okay.
it's up in the list of people.
Yep. Okay. That's good. As long as all the screens are in order. I can't see Gwen, but I can see you if you have to wave at me or throw something to get me to stop. But away we go. Okay, I am here as the communications contact for, and I'm just trying to start my show. There we go. Okay. I'm the communications contact for Friends of the Madawaska Watershed. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the council about such an important issue. However, I regret I must do so under protest. The notice of the original topic of the meeting was published in the Valley Gazette, April 29th to 26th, and elsewhere. The appropriate number of weeks before the June 16th meeting date were observed. We prepared a presentation focused on the proposed sale of the SRA. The meeting date was moved to July the 7th, and as late as June 23rd, I received assurance that the meeting was still on that topic. We received notice on July the 2nd that the topic of this meeting was changed to the rezoning bylaw. And I've seen no published notification of this agenda. It's a decision with serious implications, and the public deserves, I think, much more notice. We had planned on sharing with you advice of a forest science specialist and a past president of the Canadian Forestry Association. Due to the short notice and previous appointments, he and one other member who has extensive experience with development projects cannot attend today. So I will formally request an adjournment of the meeting concerning the rezoning of the Chippewa lands until appropriate notice has been given to the public. Now, if you decide, you may take time now or not to decide, but in accordance with your decision, I will either see you next time, or I will continue under protest to provide you with what I believe is information necessary for you to make an informed decision on the issues at hand.
I'm going to refer to the CAO, who I can't see, unfortunately, Sue. I don't believe there's any precedent for me taking a motion from council at this point. As far as I know, everything has been done according to how it needs to be done. So Sue, can you please, I guess, could I ask Sue to speak to this? I can't see her because of the presentation being up.
The public notification pertaining to the project, we have had 2 public meetings, and all of the information provided at that time was included in the municipal conditions that were set, as well as considered in preparation for the zoning bylaw amendment.
Right. So we have had public meetings on the zone, a public meeting for sure on the zoning bylaw amendment. And that I know for a fact it was at the meeting of August 29th, 2019. And this is follow up from that meeting.
Okay.
I would suggest, Mr. Delamater, that you do proceed if you want to express your concerns to council.
Okay, I will do so. I wanted just to point out that we were prepared for one thing, and 3 days later I had to get a preparation for another. So we hope to, and I have submitted a list of questions that are, in our opinion, requires explicit answers before you decide to rezone the property. And that's been listed in the pre-meeting materials that I've forwarded. I have a question of the design of the 2 buffer classes that you're considering. And I want to explain why proper design of the buffer areas is critical to the local environment, critical indeed to the success of the project. The Madawaska River is one of the jewels of the area, but this jewel is already tarnished by the effects on boat traffic on the shoreline. Seasonal high water flows and motorboat wakes impinging on the shore erodes the sandy soil. In some places, this has had disastrous results. And if I can get my mouse here. You can see here erosion around the root base, and this is the Chippewa shore here. Further down the shoreline, Here is a legacy cottage surrounded by a pine forest that had the bank collapse, and I'm sure you're aware of that. I would just note that this property would qualify as protected under the proposed EP-E2 type of buffer. The trees are near and over 24 centimeters in diameter are preserved. Other residents have spent tens of thousands of dollars remediating erosion already. So proper shoreline management is critical to prevent new erosion damage. On the Chippewa shoreline, there are areas with visible effects of erosion already. Under the EP-E2, only 2 visible trees in this picture would be protected from clearing under the restrictions proposed. You can note here a path down to the river, and you can see the effect. Under EP-E2, we figure that 4 visible trees would be protected here. Elsewhere, along the shore, the shoreline shrubbery is healthy and erosion is at a minimum. Here, EP-E2 would ensure that only 2 trees, this one and the one on the side of the picture, would be protected. The environmental difference that you've noted is the amount of underbrush at the banks. And the peer reviewer suggested twice that the county and the township consider a no vegetation removal zone buffer and allowing only 1.8 meter meandering paths at each shoreline lot. The developer's consultants proposed tree and brush removal for all trees smaller than 24 centimeters in diameter, making removal of protective underbrush almost certain. That's the EP-E2. For comparison, if this river were on Crown land, the MNRF would require a minimum of 30-meter protection zone, retain the shrub layer and all saplings under 10 centimeters, a 60% crown closure of the skyway from the trees, and a soil exposure, open soil, of less than 5%. Now, those restrictions apply on Crown land to a temporary forestry operation, which would have a less severe environmental impact than a permanent settlement of houses. Here's an illustration of why this matters. Both areas pictured are on the Chippewa side further downstream. As I said before, under the current plan, this healthy shoreline could be cleared with the exception of one large pine tree and this other tree that we're hardly seeing. Consider the other picture. Do the large trees or the small shrubs seem to have the greatest protective effect? To be clear, this is not an aesthetics problem only. Erosion leaches nutrients into the water, which can migrate downstream, collect in quieter areas such as Blackfish Bay and Hydes Bay, contributing to the growth of plant matter such as blue-green algae. And problematic blue-green algae is occurring in lakes all over Ontario. We used to think of it as a Southern Ontario agricultural problem, but in fact, Northern Ontario is home to 50% of the provincial blue-green algae problems. And I will post in the speaker's notes a CBC News article describing that. And toxins from blue-green algae can have serious health effects. It's not just aesthetic. They have health effects on people while swimming, while boating, while water skiing, and fishing. And upstream contamination can cause problem in downstream communities. Many kilometers away, it can devastate tourism and the municipal tax base. Erosion can be minimized if we take preventative measures before problems develop. The environmental protection buffers are of equal, if not more, importance on the Green Lake side of the development. Again, it's complex. The details are complex. I don't have time to get into them today, but the design of the natural buffers to prevent nutrient erosion will be critical in this landlocked, unique situation. Where are we now? The shoreline buffer, according to this report, should be left in a natural state, designed to protect the sensitive lakes. The retention of natural soil mantle and mature tree cover within 30 meters of the shoreline of the lake will be encouraged. I'll remind you that the EPE2 could result in removal of all but a few trees in the buffer zone on many lots. Further, behind the buffer zones, buildings and other impermeable constructions will produce more stormwater than has naturally flowed to the shoreline in the past. So the shoreline buffers must not be compromised in their ability to maintain a healthy understory of shrubs, since they will be exposed to more drainage stress than they are now. The M&RF standards should be seen as a minimum, not as a laudable goal. We encourage you to carefully reconsider the EP2 designation of the buffer area and adopt a different definition that will actually protect the water and the interests of the developer of the developed property. These are pictures from Green Lake in 1986. It was that year the airstrip at Chippewa Lodge was cleared, which is more than 150 meters away from the shoreline, but there was substantial dust drifted over. Nutrient runoff is increased only marginally from the first few construction sites. And if we get a bloom of filamentous or other algae that returns, it'll be difficult for the developer to interest more people to purchase sites on this side of the development. I'll also point out that we have listed in our package a number of questions related to chemistry and other errors and omissions in the environmental studies that need to be addressed before a properly informed rezoning decision is made. I don't have my specialist personnel here to consider them today. But I do want you to consider the quote from the geothermal study of the involved wetlands. Here, you'll note that they say, as 2 or more male bullfrogs were documented calling from the wetland on the 7th and on the 23rd and the 29th of June, it is assumed that bullfrogs are actively breeding in the Labrador wetland. To mitigate that, they designed the 8 EPE1 buffer. However, we filed with our permit, and I could have told them if they'd asked, video and sound evidence that their American bullfrogs sighted along the shore of Green Lake.
Mr. Delamater, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mr. Delamater, sorry, give me 1 second. Could everyone please check that their mics are muted, other than Mr. Delamater, because someone has, or make sure that any papers you have are back from your mic, because we've got significant interference and I can't hear what you're saying, and I'm sure the member of council can't hear it. Doug, it may actually be your papers you have in front of you. Can you pull them back from your mic? Because I want to hear what you're saying, and I can't hear it for the crackling sounds.
Perfect.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No. Where should I start over?
Just on this particular slide, this is where it got bad and I couldn't hear you.
All right, thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we established that the frogs were the reason for the EPE1, or one of the reasons. Here's the present plan. In Labrador Lake, the frogs are separated, as you can see here, from the shoreline and the buffer by marsh vegetation. In Green Lake, the frogs will be right up against the shoreline with no marsh protection, which calls into question the proposal to use a much less protective EPE2. Again, I just want to draw the attention to that issue. And before we end, it's close. We should also bring forward the issue of recreational crowding in each of the two sides of the development. We note that GeoFirm chose not to assess the recreational crowding on the river for the following reasons. At the greatest width, the permissible boating area would only be 10 meters if they included the shoreline buffer involved in that evaluation. The existing development already exceeds the threshold of 1 lot per 1.6 hectares of boating surface. And they felt it's a navigation route, it would be inappropriate to limit recreational boating usage. The way we think of it, none of these reasons indicate the channel is appropriate for further development. They sure indicate the contrary. The independent reviewer suggested a common dockage away from. As I understand it, the developer's proposal is to have new individual docks at each residential site along the river, which would narrow the channel even further, causing more wake damage on both banks, and also for safe channel for boats to pass each other. We put up a petition on our website when we were talking about the SRA, but most of the comments were about the effects on such development on the river and the shorelines. And as an aside, one report related spending $50,000 on erosion remediation on his site. And as an aside, on my initial letter, I referred to approximately 100 replies. The actual respondents, the last time I checked, was 84. The other ones apparently were from the site ahead of time. I've included a copy of all the comments submitted with the pre-meeting materials that you have. The peer reviewer agreed, and this is on the SWIA report on page 33, with the submitted objections that the lake was all at recreational capacity. The proposed development would result in an overcrowding of Green and Labrador Lake, is the quote. At present, there are 4 permanent and 2 seasonal residences with about 6 more severed but presently undeveloped lots. The development plans show not 1 or 2 additional building lots proposed for the small and ecologically delicate building lots, more than double the number of severed lots and potentially tripling the shoreline allowances or residences on the lake. We've asked for recognition of this overcrowding issue. To date, there has been none. We actually proposed at the public meeting realistic ways to address the ecological impacts of this plan. To date, these suggestions seem to have been dismissed. But going forward, we have to recognize that 40 years ago, we did not know what we know now. You can point to some properties along the river shoreline as examples of land that have been cleared right to the water's edge and question the owner's wisdom. But they're actually excellent examples of what happens when environmental concerns are overlooked. The river shoreline and these landlocked lake shorelines are and must be of great presence of the township, of the lakes, and of others. 40 years ago, most of us might have found the proposed construction choices acceptable. And we understand that assurances to protect the environment are standard issue with this and with other development applications, but the citizens of the township deserve more than assurances about this critical issue. So We have to recognize that environmental damage is a bit like toothpaste. Once it's out, it's very hard to put it back in the tube. Prevention is always wiser and cheaper than repair. And as our representatives, we urge you, and we hope that you will demand that protections meet or exceed current standards of best practice. The Friends of Madawaska Water urge the council to delay the passages until the developer has committed to a full implementation of environmental recommendations that meet or exceed those of the independent peer reviewer. And there are some errors and omissions in environmental studies that we pointed out. We hope they will be recognized and appropriate solutions will be incorporated into the project design. Now, my other presenter, who's not here today, asked me to add one other issue. He's apparently very familiar with development practice. And he notes that he has submitted a letter with our pre-meeting materials to you. He notes that every must follow municipal requirements. And even so, it's standard practice in the industry to require a performance bond while such projects are under construction. Given that there are many unresolved environmental issues involved and the effects may require remediation downstream or off the property, we feel that the township would be prudent to follow this practice and require such a performance bond. In summation, the Friends of the Madawaska Watershed are not opposed to a well-designed development of the Chippewa property. Let's be clear about that. They wish to see it proceed in a positive and thoughtful manner that will benefit both the development and the community. And we want to avoid problems down the road by taking positive preventative action now. And I just have one other note, and that is that we noticed the bylaw as it stands, or my copy of the bylaw as it stands, does not indicate the width of the buffer zone. And it could be 1 meter, but we hope it will be amended to meet or exceed the MNRF minimum requirement of 30 meters. Now, my descriptions of the pictures and my discussion are included in the speaker notes of the presentation, and I can post them online and send a link to the township. And thank you for the opportunity to present and highlight these concerns, even if I'm under protest about the notification. We urge you to schedule a further meeting with appropriate notice so we and the developer have a chance to inform more fully about the implications of your decision. I am done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delegator. Could you please send a copy of this presentation to Gwen Dombrowski for us, for the record?
I can give her a link. The issue is that it's something like 87 megabytes and I can't email that.
Okay.
But she can download it from my website.
Okay, I will make sure that she has done that because we do need a copy of this presentation.
Sure.
Council was provided with documentation on our agenda that doesn't entirely match what you've presented today, and some of the documentation that you sent was arrived after the agenda was published. So council was provided with that documentation, but it does mean it's going to be a little difficult to work through when the presentation I have in my package is as I noticed, somewhat different, not a lot different from the presentation you made, but certainly there are a lot of things that I would like clarification on in the presentation, and you'll have to bear with me because I have the older version. I don't know if you have that in front of you, but it would probably be helpful because that's what I happen to have.
I can get it up.
It's not about putting it up for the public, just
okay.
I want some clarification myself, I know, on a couple of
Sure.
points in that presentation, many of which were reflected in this one you just did. I just don't have a copy of this that I can refer to the pages of.
Right.
So I'm just trying to facilitate dialogue here. There will be, I'm sure there will be some questions on your presentation, and there, the developer certainly has his consultants here to respond to some of your questions and concerns as well. That also was done at the public meeting, as I mentioned. Before we get started, I'd just like to note to council that under the Planning Act, a draft plan of subdivision, the approval authority, when this application was originally submitted, had to make a decision in 180 days. This application was submitted January 24th, 2018. There were some changes made on May 3rd, 2019, but we are now at 895 days since the application was submitted. This is nearly 5 times as long as is allowed under the Planning Act. We have had 2 public meetings, one about the draft plan of subdivision, and there were changes made to reflect some of the concerns. And that one was on October 15th, 2018. The second one, which included the zoning bylaw amendment that is before council in this special council meeting package as a bylaw. That meeting on August 29th, 2019 also included updating and responding to some of the public concerns from the previous public meeting. There certainly has been, a significant amount of effort to ensure that this planning application has been considered and reviewed significantly. If you go to the Renfrew County website that lists all the subdivisions in Renfrew County that are under the process of being applied for or being developed, it is interesting to note that under Chippewa Shores, there are 55 documents and studies. Under all the rest of the applications across Renfrew County, and there are 14 other applications, the average number of documents and studies listed for each one is 8. The most other documents is one in the town of Arnprior. It has 18. So a great deal of effort has been gone to by the County of Renfrew to address issues that were presented at both public meetings, and also by the developer to ensure that any information or any studies that were required or seemed relevant were actually completed. All of the relevant studies were peer reviewed by multiple, actually by more than one peer reviewer in some cases. I would normally start with questions from council, but I'm wondering if council would do me the indulgence of just seeking clarification on some of the points that were raised, and that might answer some of council's questions as well. Would that be all right with council? Anyone with a concern? Councillor Bromwich?
Yes, through you, Chair. I'd like to hear more, please, from the other side, if I would, before we start.
Yes, I would just like to ask some clarification questions on the presentation.
Yeah, we got to dig deeper here. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to then refer the clarifications to the applicant in order to have their experts be able to, and their consultants be able to address some of the concerns. I'm sort of directing traffic. Is that okay? Are you good with that? Okay. All right. So as I say, we did have the original presentation from the Friends of the Madawaska Watershed. And, I know when you started, you referred to the difference that is made in the amount of underbrush on the banks being what was the difference between erosion and not erosion. So I'm actually working on, as I said, I'm sorry, I have to go back to your original submission, and I'm working on that slide that refers to that. I wondered, Mr. Delamater, if you could express to me what evidence you have other than photographic that it is the underbrush that's making the difference there. And I would refer to the other side of the shoreline where along Ohio Road, there are significant properties that have manicured lawns down to the water, yet not all properties that have manicured lawns are suffering from erosion. So it isn't, I would put to you, I'd like to understand why you feel it is the lack of underbrush that will be the issue in terms of erosion on the Madawaska River.
Well, yes, I keep turning to the screen where your face is. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm not the expert, but I do know that the understory, the brush, is very important. I do have a contact in, and it was in the presentation there, an Amanda Conway from Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. I consulted her and, or she replied to my question. She offered to advise council about the importance of the understory. The fact that the MNRF require small brush and the understory to be left in place between a riverbank and their operation sort of speaks to the fact that why would they do that if it didn't work? She will tell you, and can, you know, give you the technical background of why that's important. Find from her, of course, that Fisheries and Oceans has no jurisdiction here until you start dredging, but she was more than happy to give you sort of her educated advice. So that's all I can say. I mean, it's obvious that if I look at this, can you see the things on the screen yet? Can you see 3 pictures?
No, I'm sorry, but
Okay. I'm trying to get up an old version of the show, and
so if it's the one in the council package, is it the page that's titled The River Shoreline?
there are several pages, but the one with the 3 pictures, yes.
Yes, it has 3 pictures. Okay.
Yes.
So council is aware of what page you're referring to and the pictures.
And we show there that there are 2 areas, Chippewa shore, that are showing exposed erosion. And further downstream, there's, and this, by the way, those pictures are, the background there is that was cleared for a campground. So there's a clearing in behind. I have no expertise as to whether that causes the erosion or not, but further down, the backstory here is not disturbed. The shoreline is not disturbed in the sense that there are shrubbery and so on like that. And as I pointed out in the forestry standards, the understory is the critical thing to protecting the shoreline. So,
but you do have to concede to me that there are shoreline areas along the Madawaska River that do not have any of the underbrush layer that are actually lawns to the river, and they're not all experiencing erosion. It's not just a question of what's been removed. There may be other factors involved in that erosion besides the underbrush. I mean, it may not be the only factor. I'm wondering if I could ask, now I don't know who's who from Cumbermere Lodge Limited, but so I apologize, but could the consultant who could speak to this potentially, could you let me know who you are?
Yes, it's Drew Paulus here.
Okay, thank you.
So with respect to erosion, you know, typically not in the realm of a biologist's expertise, more so in the geotechnical engineering realm. However, I would agree that the presentation draws on a casual relationship that may at some level be opportunistic. There are certainly areas on the Ohio River or Ohio Road side of the river where the manicured lawn extends right to the river's edge and that there is no significant erosion present. My own opinion would be that the degree or significance of the erosion is likely more a function of river hydraulics and boat traffic, as opposed to being strictly associated with vegetation structure, whether that be within the riparian zone further back, or the size class of the vegetation present.
Okay, thank you. And you know, I think my concern with that point, Mr. De La Matter, is that we have had two significant spring flooding events in Madawaska Valley. And in those events, I certainly was mayor throughout those two events. I've been very aware of the erosion issues that occurred along the river at Pine Cliff, and actually just a little ways down from where Councillor Poplinski and I live. The other erosion at the cottage that you showed, I was very cognizant of that as well. But in both of those cases, especially in the case of the erosion at Pine Cliff, we saw 100-year-old trees falling into the river, and we saw meters and meters of land disappearing. I would suggest that there may be more than just underbrush that is a factor in erosion along the Madawaska River. And so I wouldn't say that it was the only thing that was going to save properties from erosion. I do anticipate that based on the
I totally agree with that.
okay, based on the EPE2 zoning that is looking to be put on the shoreline road allowance, I would note to the public that at the moment, if an adjacent property owner wishes to purchase the shoreline road allowance, it is sold to them. There are no stipulations, there are no conditions. It is sold to them. And since 2001, 37 parcels of shoreline road allowance have been sold along this waterway in the area of this development. No conditions, no concerns were expressed throughout that process that we should have conditions that I'm aware of, certainly. I don't think any member of council has received correspondence about that. It's just been the way that the municipality has handled shoreline road allowance. My concern with what you're bringing to us is that you are asking for a significant change in policy, because any change that we make would have to be a change that we make for all. We can't just make a change for this particular development. If it is good for this development, I would suggest it is equally good for the entire rest of the waterway. You're asking for a significant consideration here. So just to be aware, it is a significant consideration. On that same slide, you referred to the peer reviewer, suggested twice that the county and the township consider, and I'm sorry, it is the old slide, requiring a no vegetation removal zone. Could you highlight for me which peer reviewer that was, please?
I don't have that here today. If I had, I'm not the expert, but I did, I believe. Most of my references are referred back to their things, because again, I'm running for notes on this thing, not on the last thing, but
okay, so you don't happen to have that at your...
I don't have it with me, but
okay.
I know it's a quote that I pulled.
Okay, then perhaps I could ask the applicant, are you aware of which peer reviewer made that recommendation? And if you could tell me who it was? Is there anyone who can answer that question?
Yes, that would have been Landmark Environmental from Barrie, a landscape design company.
Right.
Okay. So does that recommendation appear in the Geotherma Engineering limited report, which was at least 90 pages plus additional documentation? Is that it didn't appear in that report. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was not ever a requirement through the geofirma EIS report, which has been the standard by which all of the environmental conditions on this project have been established.
Okay, and that report was peer reviewed by Cambium Consulting and Engineering out of Peterborough?
Yes,
Okay. And in the end, they did not express any concern with the report. They were able to work through any issues that they had with it, and then I believe they signed off on it. Is that correct?
yes. The EIS reports were peer reviewed on an ongoing basis, and a final report was issued in June of 2019, and all issues that had been raised and had been fully dispositioned at that time.
Okay, thank you. And what was Landmark Environmental hired to do? Are you aware of that?
Yes. One of the requirements at the outset of the study or of the application was to submit an overall landscape plan that was going to identify all site-related landscape issues. We took exception to that. We felt that site plan control was far more helpful, as the individual lot that would be developed would have a very specific footprint, and there would be a time frame in which that would happen. The tree conservation report, which recommended the conservation of trees over 25 centimeters, is very specific. But to identify those trees in 2020 may be very premature to what the landscape looks like when the lot would actually be developed. So it was agreed with the county and the municipality that site plan control, which would have individual landscape plans approved by a qualified biologist, submitted with the building permit process, was far more relevant. So in fact, the peer review of the overall landscape plan became somewhat irrelevant just because the overall landscape plan requirement was no longer part of the application.
Okay. All right. Does any member of council have a question on that key point? I want to identify what studies we're referring to and what Mr. Delamater is referring to, just so we're aware of the studies that were done and the relationship here. So this was suggested by a peer reviewer who was hired to peer review a landscape plan that was initially drafted as a fairly quick plan by the shrub man, I believe.
Yes, that's right. And it was really always deferred to the recommendations of the EIS report. The very significant on-site presence of the geofirma engineering company and their very specific site-related data and investigations and detailed site understanding were the basis of the landscape plan to begin with, along with other reasonable landscape practices that had been approved on other developments in the county. And with that in mind, it was always deferred to whatever the EIS report recommended would be adopted as landscape requirements for the Chippewa Shores development. So the EIS report is actually a landscape report for us as well.
And any issues of landscape or which trees will be cut is going to occur at site plan, and it will be done according to the tree conservation plan. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there are a number of elements of the site plan control at that time. It would include drainage, grading, stormwater management, landscaping, and ensure that all the best practices to avoid any erosion or stormwater going into the water side are dealt with the mitigation measures that were very extensively outlined in the EIS report.
Does council have any questions about that component? Just so we understand clearly who the various consultants were and how their work related to each other. I'm not seeing Councillor Bromwich.
Yeah, it's through you, Chair. Just a general question here. Possibly Charles Cheeseman could jump in here on this. Is this a minimum requirement of every site plan agreement that for subdivision? Or would it be just a normal requirement to have all these extra peer reviews done? Or would you say there's an exceptional amount of work put in to ensure that the environment is safe? In Charles's years in subdivision agreements, would you suggest that this is a fairly really comprehensive plan that he's developed here? Thank you.
I don't know if Mr. Cheeseman wishes to participate. I know he is listening in. Mr. Cheeseman.
I can answer that question, Chair, if that's okay.
Okay, that is fine.
That's a fair question. Yeah, if, you know, in the years gone by, Mr. Delamater mentioned this, how we used to do things 40 years ago. This is the whole new way of developing. And the mayor mentioned the number of studies that have gone into this report. The surface water impact assessment is something that's relatively new. The geotechnical landscape. So it's about as comprehensive as we've ever done in the county of Renfrew. In terms of the landscaping, that was a consultant that we hired as well. We had them involved in the project, and they recommended for the shoreline road allowance that there be a no-touch area on the shoreline road allowance, but that wasn't what was recommended in the environmental impact study. So you know, at the end of the day, we went with the environmental impact study. My one comment I would just like to make, and maybe Drew can address this. I understood that the trees, there would be certain restrictions on trees, but I didn't think that that was going to open up the removal of all the underbrush. And in fact, the zoning bylaw defines a vegetative buffer as a strip or corridor of vegetation adjacent to a lake, which is intended to achieve, among other objectives, the protection of water quality by filtering out sediment and other pollutions from runoff. The details of the vegetative buffer shall be in accordance with the approved agreements and site plans. So there's more detail than just that tree cutting. And in the study that Geofirma did on page 47, they indicated that thinning of small diameter trees allows for the establishment of a more robust shrub and herbaceous vegetation layer, which has been shown to provide a greater level of attenuation and sediment nutrients and buffer solely vegetated with mature trees. So I think that there's going to be a link to the site plan agreement that implements these best management practices in the EIS. They may borrow some of the best management practices suggested by the landmark study. We can include those in the site plan agreement. But I did not understand and think that the entire underbrush was just going to be destroyed. That would be protected and help with nutrient runoff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, although the landmark study was, I believe, it was commissioned by the county to address public concerns, and there were two of them. The second one is the one I'm referring to, and it is only 3 pages. Did Landmark Environmental ever visit the site? Have they got any sense of the site? Because I recognize that they do come from Barrie, Ontario.
No, and I didn't have my video on the last time. I apologize. No, Landmark
okay.
did not visit the site, and I think Geofirma did visit the site. Would have had a look at, but the peer reviewers typically look at the documents and don't do the site visits. But
Okay.
it's still an important. The whole peer review process is far more robust than it's ever been in the past. I just want to assure people that we took that very seriously.
I definitely concur with that. It was taken very seriously, but I do believe the main peer reviewer was Cambium, and they did ultimately sign off on the document that they worked with Geofirma to refine and to ensure that it addressed their concerns. So this is a secondary peer review that we're referring to from Landmark, and it is not necessarily as extensive as the work that was done between the other two consultants. I would just suggest, just by virtue of the in-depth look that was taken by the first two consultants. Did the proponent want to speak to that at all? To confidence in the studies and what's being recommended, or?
Sure, it's Drew Paulus again here, as the lead author on the EIS, and I apologize, my video has, for whatever reason, stopped working. But yes, just speaking back to the peer review process, Cambium had specific language that they were seeking to have included specifically in Section 7 of the EIS, which is the avoidance and mitigation measures, and was specific to having a buffer, which is your setback, that is permanently vegetated by native or non-invasive, and key point here, self-sustaining vegetation to protect the natural feature against the adjacent land use. So that was key wording that they had insisted on implementation into the EIS. And following along that was that buffers that are vegetated, a mix of grassy vegetation and shrubby or woody vegetation, have been identified as being the most effective in mitigating impacts associated with anthropogenic activities.
Okay, so then that would be a component of site plan review that would be looked at that point. Is that not correct?
That's the intent, is that that is captured on a site specific or a lot by lot specific tree conservation report, which is consistent with most other municipalities and land development.
Okay,
Can I
and
ask a question?
that's super.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, I just, yes, Mr. Cheeseman,
my place.
1 second. I just wanted to clarify that the key thing about that being site specific is that the specific trees on that lot would be looked at.
That's correct. Yeah, each
Rather
tree.
than a sort of a generalized concept, each tree on that lot would be reviewed and identified whether it was a healthy tree worthy of, of the size and the ability to grow and be able to continue to thrive on the lot. That would be
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And that requirement stems from that. At this time, we don't know what the specific nature of each lot will look like in the as-built. So we need those development plans from the future lot owner as to what they would like to do. Then we can overlay that on the existing environment, i.e. the trees, the vegetation, and provide recommendations for retention of vegetation to meet the objectives outlined in the EIS.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cheeseman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Baron. Drew, if I can ask you the question then, the wording from Cambium, did that wording, specific wording, was that put into your revised report? And if not, will it then form your tree conservation plan that you have to submit as part of these? They're right now, they're just in draft form, but the draft conditions of draft approval require a tree conservation plan. Are you going to work, how are you going to work that wording into implementation for the municipality going forward?
So the that wording is in the current approved final EIS. It was also in the second draft. That feedback came from Cambium on the first submission.
Okay.
So it is in the approved EIS, and the approved EIS is the guide for the future tree conservation reports.
Okay. So this is not a case of there being no controls here that are being implemented on this property. Do recognize, public and members of council certainly recognize that, as I said, normally under our bylaw to sell shoreline, it's sold without any conditions whatsoever. That is what has been occurring traditionally in Madawaska Valley. So if council is going to consider what's been put before them today by Friends of the Madawaska Watershed, It is a much larger discussion. If we are inclined to look at this, it is a discussion for the entire future of waterfront development in Madawaska Valley. It will have impacts on many things besides this particular development. It would include impacts on properties such as the one that we saw this morning in the planning meeting, where someone is trying to replace a traditional cottage that has seen its day and needs to be rebuilt with a modest structure, but they may not be able to do that if we do implement additional restrictions on how shoreline can be used. So there are many, many issues that would have to be looked at to address what Mr. Delamater has basically, his group has brought forward, that we need to consider the MNRF conditions that they place on logging operations as they are close to water. And, you know, as to whether those are the best conditions, that would be a discussion for council, or as to whether or not council wish to implement anything like that. We have to recognize that what we do with this project at the moment is going to have an impact for the future. We can't do to one property owner what we don't intend to continue on and look to do. If it's good for this one, it's good for them all. So,
if I could add one thing to that, sorry, I would have raised
Yes,
my hand,
please.
but my camera.
yes,
So one key point, and you did touch on it, is that guideline that is referenced in the Friends of Madawaska presentation is relative to Crown land policies for forestry operations, which generally involve intensive clear cutting with very large disruptive machinery. That level of disruption is not consistent with this development. Those guidelines are not generally applied to residential development, and there is probably a rationale as to why not. I suspect it is the inconsistencies in the construction approach and the long-term operation of it.
certainly, if we look at, and council was out to Babinski Road to see the results of a logging operation along that road leading to the Little Bark Bay development, we can see that the logging operation has a significant impact that I would anticipate with the tree conservation plan. There would be no chance that we would have a similar impact in this development. In actual fact, I would suggest that the trees have value, and property values would be significantly decreased by removing all the trees. You know, I know for my own property, I'm pleased that I do have one large pine tree. I would have had a few more, but you know, the fellow who cleared my lot for me had a little bit of an issue with backing up into trees and damaging them on me. I see there are certainly methods that will be employed to ensure that if a tree is chosen as an important tree that meets the criterion as a healthy tree, that it will be protected. And there are lots of rules around how the lot owner will proceed to address the property and the trees. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I wanted to go through and get some of these questions answered and also hear from the applicant just to see if we could be a little clearer on some of these issues. So at this point, does council have any questions about the proposed MNRF conditions that Friends of the Madawaska watershed are suggesting would be better conditions for this development, and as I would suggest for future development, because we can't do to this one what we don't intend to continue to do? Any questions on the conditions that were put forward as being the best practice here? Not, okay, I'm sorry. Councillor Poplinski, is your hand up? I've got a big hand, all I can see. I apologize. Is your hand up? Your mic is off. Could you turn your mic on? Can't hear you. These are the challenges of video meetings. Okay. Can you No, I still can't hear you. Oh, he moved.
Hello?
There, now I can hear you. Did you have a question or a comment at this point? Oh, your mic is off again. I'm sorry. Go.
I'm on?
You're on. Don't touch anything.
Sorry about that. My computer gave me a warning. I was running out of power, so I had to move location and get plugged in here. So I'm on now. So no, I don't have any concerns. I think there's some great points that Mr. Delamater has raised. I think that we have to be very cautious as we move forward, and because it's a lot of implications for everything moving forward. And I just want to make sure that his concerns are addressed. But you know, I'm not prepared to you know, to jump into and do anything too drastic at the moment because of all of the other situations moving forward. So, but I don't have any other questions. For some reason, I've lost part of the visual here too.
Okay, so perhaps a member of staff could help Councillor Poplinski with his issues. Councillor Bromwich.
Thank you, through you, Chair. On one other issue here, I've noticed a few complaints about the water traffic and about the boating on the river. We had a serious problem in the last council where several people came to us and asked us to investigate with the police what they're doing to slow down the boat traffic and what would they do if they would step up patrols, because the erosion factor was very serious. And I took this to the OPP. We had a meeting on it, and the only answer the OPP gave me was, we patrol that river constantly, and they wouldn't tell us when. They wouldn't give us any kind of routine, and that's their responsibility to patrol the river. The erosion factor is there, flooding, possibly trees and shrubs being cut down, and boating. So there's many factors in there that we have no control over in the water. So I'm just saying, the people are concerned about more boat traffic. It's inevitable. It's going to happen.
Okay, thank you. I think that speaks to the point that was brought up by Mr. Delamater about recreational crowding. And of course, the challenge that we would face on recreational crowding would be that this is an open waterway. It doesn't just exist in Madawaska Valley. There are numerous points where the public can launch boats. I'm not sure what, I guess I will ask Mr. Delamater if you could express to council what it is you would expect council or hope council would do if a recreational crowding study could even be done and it was determined that there were enough or too many boats on this waterway. What would be, I guess I'm asking what it is that you would be looking for there.
Well, I think the issue to be raised is that as I understand it, the peer reviewer suggested that they institute a common dockage, which if everyone has a dock and a boat tied up along the river on both sides, the available navigation channel is smaller. And they were going back to the suggestion of the peer reviewer that if they had a common dockage away from the river for those people at the development, then the river channel wouldn't be narrowed. And it seemed to us that the reasons that Geofirma did not try and produce a study were all reasons that spoke to the fact that it may be already too crowded, and adding more docks and boats, not traffic, but docks tied up, would narrow the channel even further.
Okay, would the applicant like to speak to that recommendation, which I believe was one from Landmark Environmental again?
I'd be happy to address that. The first key issue about recreational crowding is that it does not apply to open waterways. Geothermal were very clear about that in the public meetings. It was just an example in the study that the wording was put in there to really illustrate why the recreational crowding issues on an open waterway are not relevant. And as you pointed out, Ms. Mayor, the access to that channel comes from everywhere on the system, from Barry's Bay, from Hinterland Beach, from even the Conroy Marsh. And if one were to try and control the amount of recreational boating on that channel, it's not simply the activity on each side of the banks that's there, it's the entire water system. What the mitigation measure that we think is very helpful here is to have parallel docks, and they'll be moored, and boats will be moored at the absolute minimum distance from the shoreline to allow for a boat to be actually tied up. Right now, there are many deadfalls on the Chippewa side that are protruding into the river that will be far greater in length than any docks or boats that we would have. And so the channel is already naturally restricted by the existing obstructions in the channel. And people do not go along the shoreline, they go in the middle of the river where the access is far more reasonable. So we're really not dealing with a recreational boating issue that has impact with the Chippewa Shores development. And I would remind everyone that this property is zoned tourism commercial largely, and there's many uses allowed already. We're not taking something that has absolutely no development and adding development to it. We're actually down zoning considerably from what could be there should it be developed as a tourism commercial development.
Okay. Does council have any questions at this point about the recreational crowding study? Again, I would wonder if it said that that there were already too many boats, would council be prepared to take an action to limit the number of boats on the waterway? That's a pretty big issue that is being brought before us. And I don't think that it is something that can be solved by whether or not we grant the zoning bylaw amendment, or whether or not we sell the shoreline to Cumbermere Lodge Limited, who is then going to pass it on to the condo corporation. The solution is not there that I see necessarily. It would be a matter of having to address the issue across the whole system. I do believe at one point there was some talk of there being a boat launch at Chippewa, at the Chippewa Beach. Maybe you could speak to that?
All right.
What study that was in?
Yes, well, that was part of the landmark environmental recommendations that Mr. DeLamater was referring to. It wasn't a dock, it was a boat launch.
Okay, that was it.
And that recommendation illustrated exactly why the landmark environmental, all of their recommendations were not accepted. There is absolutely no practical way to put a boat ramp on the Chippewa Beach. The shoreline road allowance on the beach is flooded, which means that it's no more than 2.5 feet deep, 66 feet offshore. So they're recommending a boat ramp be placed on a beach where you'd have to go well past 66 feet to be able to actually launch a boat. And it was really very impractical. It had no value whatsoever. It was not considered seriously. And it just demonstrates and illustrates how inadequate the landmark environmental peer review was, because they had no direct site plan knowledge or data. They clearly would not have recommended to do something that was impractical if they had actually had the information at hand.
Okay, and Madawaska Valley does provide both launching facilities at the Barry's Bay Wharf and at the Cumbermere Dock as well. So, I mean, there's no reason why the property owners in this new development wouldn't be able to access and use those facilities. There is, though, as you did mention, there is language in the condominium agreement that speaks to the question of docks. And everyone will, of course, be doing their best to ensure that the waterway remains navigable and safe. I don't think anyone has any intentions of building an enormous dock that people are going to hit with their boat. I mean, I would hope not. They would not be able to under the condo agreement. Is that not correct?
Yes, and in fact, one of the conditions that has been part of draft plan approval is that the docks be parallel, that they can only extend out far enough to be deep enough to moor a boat parallel to the shore. And that will be a continuing condition for the landowner that purchases the abutting land to be able to actually use the SRA as part of the license agreement. So the enforcement of that is very strong. And if someone attempted to put a dock further out, they wouldn't have access to it because they wouldn't be able to use the SRA to get to it. So we have a very strong control on that, and we're very cognizant of exactly the points that everyone agrees to here, that boat traffic on the Madawaska is something that needs to be carefully managed so there aren't any environmental and, more importantly, human safety issues.
Okay, thank you. Does council have any further comment or discussion on the question of recreational crowding? Now, Councillor Poplinski, I can't see your hand, so if it is up, wave at me. Okay, no, it's not. Okay. So then I guess, Mr. DeLaMatter, I think one of the things that you brought up is the petition that Friends of the Madawaska Watershed conducted, and that you had 84 responses. I'm just wondering how you made the public aware of this petition. My concern is, and I'll express the concern and let you respond to this. My concern is that you had 84 responses, and 84, if I'm reading this correctly, 84 were 100% in agreement with the petition's statement that the rezoning should be delayed. I'm surprised as an economist, we don't often get 100% agreement on anything. So I just wanted you maybe to speak to how the public was made aware of that petition.
Yes, I'm on. We publicized it through, I think, the Lake Kaministkeg Facebook page. We had a Facebook page of our own. We contacted the Green and Trout Lake Association, and through Facebook basically tried to get, we weren't trying to get, 5,000 signatures or anything. We just wanted to know what the people who used the lake and lived on the lake thought. And it turned out that 84 people agreed, and 30, and I think I would be more inclined to 30 of 84 considered serious enough to leave a comment. And so that made us confident that we should proceed and express those concerns.
Okay, just in looking at the petition, because you did provide us with what was on it, I do believe, in one of the documents. The heading is petition, and then on the back of the page I printed, it says MV Friends petition. So I'm assuming this was what was the lead into the petition. In this lead in, please support our council and neighbors by signing this petition to encourage our council to reject the rezoning of the Chippewa Shores property until the developer submits a proposal that respects fully the recommendations of the independent scientific studies and significantly reduces the potential for negative impacts on the environment and the community. Could you tell me which independent scientific studies are referred to in this introduction to the petition because I'm uncertain of which independent scientific studies it is referring to. And I have reviewed the studies, as you may have figured out.
Yeah, no, I think we were looking at the peer reviewers as independent rather than because we pay for them. And so they're maybe more motivated to give impartial analysis, if you will.
Okay.
And, you know, that, I think that was it. And we had, I mean, it was a long time ago. I don't have it on written on my hand, the actual items that we had, but ordinances where, you know, they had recommended something and something else was being in rezoning and stuff. So as I said, I don't have, you know, in front of me that particular study that we did in March. But I think in general, well,
So
I
was,
don't have that study here.
okay, was that?
If you let me go, you know, if you give me some time, I will address it, yes.
Okay, was the independent scientific study done by the Friends of the Madawaska Watershed? I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No, we were, I think the people that were upset were referring to items that the peer reviewers had indicated that were not reflected in the final description.
Okay.
I apologize for not having a checklist, but I don't.
No, I know we're both winging it here. Trust me, we're both winging it here. As I say, a lot of this information I only received a little over 24 hours ago. So, all right. So I guess there was a comment you made there that I would like to verify. Were any of the peer review studies paid for by taxpayers and not paid for by the applicant?
The definition of the peer review study, as I believe, and Mr. Cheeseman, I think, could guarantee that, is the county pays for the peer review studies. The developer pays for the original.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go to Mr. Cheeseman to clarify that, please.
So actually what happens, the developer pays for those, for the peer reviewer. It's part of the application process. They submit a peer review deposit, but we control the peer reviewer. They work for us and we hire them. And so it's an arrangement where we do have control over the peer reviewer, but they're paid for by the developer. So there's no taxpayer money funded for these things. But they're still independent. I do want to ensure you that.
Mm-hmm. So the Geofirma, I believe it was, is the original consultant hired by the applicant, but Cambium was a peer reviewer and they were hired by the county. Is that correct?
Yes, and the Cambium was he's sort of the general contractor there of sorts of peer review, and they sourced out Landmark, and I think they another one of the firms that reviewed the surface water impact assessment, Hutchinson Environmental, they sourced those peer reviewers for us as well. But Cambium is working for the county, yes.
Okay, and it's paid for by the applicant. Okay, so Cambium did sign off on the natural heritage study and the environmental impact assessment. There was a November 29th, 2018 letter saying that they'd reviewed the most recent version of the report, and it's our opinion that the previously identified environmental and ecological technical issues have been adequately addressed. So, you know, the work was done, definitely. There's no doubt about it, and it was a long, careful process. And I do believe that Hutchinson also had a letter that was on the county website that where they did also sign off. Maybe I don't have that one to my fingertips on what it was that they peer reviewed as well. So they did work through the process and come to a satisfactory conclusion in terms of what has been presented as is-
And I can confirm that, Mayor, that Hutchison Environmental peer-reviewed the SWIA study, and they had a number of very helpful comments that were dispositioned entirely by Geofirma, and they signed off on their peer review. And it was actually a very interesting peer review after the public meeting, because they took many of the public comments that were asked for further review and analyzed and dispositioned each one of them in their final peer review approval.
Okay, so, and that's the letter, I found it, took me a bit, of March 4th, 2019, where Hutchinson Environmental's last paragraph is that all comments discussed and submitted throughout the review process were addressed in the final version of the report and met both our review objectives and questions, as well as associated legislation. So, you know, I do believe that the work has been done here on this particular development. I guess at this point, my thought is that the Friends of the Madawaska Watershed are looking for a higher level of protection for the shoreline and of control over recreational crowding than is currently exists in Madawaska Valley. And what we have in this development is a higher level of protection of the shoreline due to the condominium agreement and the implementation of the tree conservation plan on the shoreline. And after much consideration of the idea that by council that we would allow for the imposing of a specific EP-E2 zone on what is essentially at the moment our property as a municipality. So, you know, we have taken this into consideration and had dialogue and discussion on this matter. And if there's a member of council who wants to speak to that, please feel free, put up your hands. I'm not trying to make this a monologue, just want to reassure the Friends of the Madawaska Watershed that council has not taken any of the decisions that we've made lightly, and we have done so very carefully in consideration of the material. Councillor Bromwich.
Thank you. Just a general comment here, just to sort of try to put this to bed finally. Most of the situations that the Friends of the Madawaska Valley River thing suggest, they use the word could. This could happen. Worst case scenario, it could create erosion if this happened. Could. It's not set in stone that it's going to happen. After going on a grand tour of this particular project, and for a considerable amount of time last, I think it was 2 years ago, actually, as it was coming, I saw firsthand the amount of work that went into ensure that this development was not going to be a negative thing for the valley. It was impressive as to the detail, right down to saving a marsh that was used as a garbage pit, basically for dirt, salvage for wildlife, right in the center of the development, without even being asked to do it, so that it would enhance the environmental experience of the people. One other thing is, I think if you're going to spend a considerable amount of money on a home and a piece of land like this, and you have the resources, you don't want to see your land being eroded into the river. You're going to put exceptional amount of work into landscaping to ensure that that stays safe. And people are coming here with the idea of enjoying the wilderness, enjoying the environmental safety of this area. I think they're going to invest their money in actually saving this erosion problem, and they might even address it. So I understand that the worst case scenario is being brought here, but I don't believe it's actually going to take place. And we all know that some people do abuse the system even after the law has been set, backfilling their lakes with sand, which is against the law. Once that's done, how do you fix it? But I feel fairly secure that this whole development has gone way above any other development I've ever seen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bromwich. I think one of the issues that wasn't on the presentation that we received, but Mr. Delamater, you did bring it up on your presentation today. Council did see the issue of a letter of credit or performance bond in a letter that we received from Mr. Bauk. And I understand Mr. Bauk couldn't be here today, but you did bring it up on your slide, the question of the municipality requiring a $2 million, as an example, performance bond. I'm wondering if the applicant would like to address performance bonds and address that point. And I don't know who would like to do that from the group.
So I just unmuted myself. It's Beth Baden. I'm the lawyer for the applicant. It is common to request a performance bond for outstanding municipal works that still may not be completed at the time of registration of the condominium, and that can go into a condominium agreement. But that would be related to outstanding work that is not completed on the condominium lands itself. And so this would be, in my view, excessive to say that there would be a letter of credit of $2 million. And what is it specifically related to? So if you're posting a letter of credit, if you had something, for instance, like the road wasn't complete and you wanted to proceed to allow the registration to occur, you could request that the letter of credit be available for the completion of the, whether it's granular B gravel on the road or whatever it is. And that once that work is done, then the architect or the engineer would certify and that letter of credit would be released. But this, I'm having difficulty trying to follow what exactly we're looking to post $2 million. What's being requested in terms of $2 million? And there's, in my view, there is nothing outstanding with respect to the work that the municipality would be requiring. So that's the difficulty I have.
Okay, thank you. So a performance bond of this nature would have to be a contract that clearly identified exactly what needed to be, remain to be completed.
Yes.
Is a performance bond ever used as a surety against potential environmental damage?
I have not seen a surety bond for any potential environmental damage at all. And I don't believe it's even something. So you have, under the condominium agreement, we are going to be signing a condominium agreement that agrees to all of the provisions. The provision relating to the shoreline road allowance is that this land will be bought by the condominium corporation, and the condominium corporation will be responsible for enforcing the provisions as it relates to the studies, the environmental studies that have been completed, and then you have the site plan process as well. This will also, it's just like an extra layer that the condominium would be enforcing this provision because the municipality, with respect to any bylaws that are applicable to the shoreline road allowance, always has their enforcement provisions as well. So whatever laws or regulations are applicable would be enforceable by the municipality should they so choose. But the condominium has a vested interest in doing this for all of the condominium owners. They want to protect the interests of all of the condominium owners in the development. I know there was a suggestion at one point that they're in a conflict of interest, but I don't believe that is the case. If you look at condominiums across this whole province, across the country, they are always in a position of the board has a duty to protect the common elements of the condominium, the common assets. So the shoreline road allowance would be a common asset, and that would be part of the board's duty to protect that.
Okay, so under the condominium agreement that council is considering, has approved draft conditions for, the municipality didn't, what word do I want to use? I would say abrogate our responsibility to the condo corp. Ultimately, the responsibility for ensuring that the condo agreement is fulfilled and that the measures for the tree conservation plan, that they are followed, it still remains with the municipality. What we have here is just an additional enforcement agent that actually happens to be there.
Correct, yes.
You know, it's a lot easier to enforce something if you happen to be there on a daily basis and you see that your neighbor's got a bulldozer coming up to their lot, right? You're aware of that. Whereas
a lot of peer pressure in terms of within the condominium community that everybody will want to protect the entire shoreline. I think that it is important to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas normally issues where there have been violations of agreements, we're relying on complaints. The municipality tends to address bylaw issues as complaints driven, and there may not always be someone there. So I think the fact that we have a condo corp that will be very mindful of what their neighbors are doing is just going to make sure that there's that added layer of protection that isn't normally existent in the municipality if our bylaw enforcement officer doesn't happen to notice something or doesn't receive a complaint from someone in the community to go investigate something. So, you know,
If I can say, it's good to know that. It's good to know that because the question arose, what if someone, you know, across the river notices something? And who does he complain to? One of the neighbors of the person doing it. But if we can complain to the municipality and then the municipality can talk to the condo board, that's the second layer, I guess, which is a good thing to know.
Absolutely, and that's an important component of this. So it isn't the municipality giving up our responsibility for enforcement. It's rather we're getting the assistance of the condo corporation. And in this particular case, the condo corp has that added stick of being able to take away the right to use the shoreline, which the municipality, if we had left this where each individual piece of shoreline was available for purchase to the lot owners as the adjacent property owners, we wouldn't have that kind of a stick available to us. So I want people to recognize that this has been designed in a way to ensure that the tree conservation plan is upheld on the shoreline road allowance. And that is not something that would normally occur in the municipality. We just, if you look at the bylaw, if you are an adjacent property owner to the shoreline and you apply to buy it, it's sold to you. There are no conditions. So that's a major condition to begin to look at how the environment is being protected through the conditions of this development. And then that second thing is that wonderful stick of having the neighbor with their eyes on you and then being part of that condo corp and able to then immediately find out what's going on, to report to the condo corporation. And then there's that other layer of being able to report issues to the municipality, because ultimately we are the enforcement agent.
I thought it was actually a very good solution, and it was
yes, I love the stick
implemented.
Yes, I love the stick that the condo corp has. You know, that's a good stick. You know, you can have carrots, but sometimes you do need to carry a stick. And being able to deny an adjacent lot owner the use of the shoreline because it isn't their property is a pretty big stick. Does anyone on council have any concerns about either the performance bond or any questions about that or about enforcement? Because those were some issues that were in our letters. Okay. I think I've gone through everything I wanted to talk to Mr. Delamater about from the presentation I received earlier and tried to incorporate what he provided today in terms of that discussion. Does any member of council have a question for the applicant or for Mr. Delamater, or would anyone like to discuss any of these points?
It's Drew Paulus here again. I just have one clarification I'd like to make on the difference between the two EP zonings and why one is applied to Labrador Lake and the other not applied to Green Lake. So the significance there, poor choice of words, the difference there is the wetland that is part of Labrador Lake. So the presence of the breeding bullfrogs is relative to a natural heritage feature referred to as significant wildlife habitat for breeding wetland amphibians. A bit of a mouthful, but the bullfrog is an indicator species of that type of significant wildlife habitat. The reason it doesn't apply to Green Lake, despite the bullfrogs being present, is that there is no mapped wetland community around Green Lake. There is the kind of an offshoot, the Rocky Point wetland, which shares a hydraulic connection. However, breeding surveys, amphibian surveys, were completed there, and no bullfrogs, actually, I don't believe any amphibians were identified. So that's the key differentiation there, is that there is no wetland community present on Green Lake that would then be classified as significant wildlife habitat due to the presence of the bullfrog. Which also, just a very minor point, on one of the slides, it indicates that the bullfrog is a species at risk, which is not correct.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. So
Threatened, perhaps.
Hmm?
It
So-
is a special species. It's threatened. And
Okay.
they mentioned that in the report.
I don't believe it is considered a threatened species in Ontario either under the Endangered Species Act.
Okay. All right. But there is the EPE1 zone around Labrador Lake that ensures the protection of the bullfrogs breeding ground. I'm taking it.
That is a fair kind of summary of it in more simplistic terms.
So they have somewhere to make more bullfrogs.
Well,
That's
my issue there, because detect bullfrog breeding habitat on Green Lake doesn't mean it isn't there. And I have evidence like sound and visual that it is. So I don't want them to have missed it and then make a decision based on incorrect information. That's all.
Right. It's not protecting the bullfrog habitat. It is protecting a wetland that is considered more significant for wetland amphibians based on the presence of bullfrogs. So it is more about the wetland vegetation community than it is about the individual amphibian species.
Okay. And any questions on the bullfrogs from council? Oh, come on, guys, you left me hanging out there having to talk about bullfrog habitat for mating. Councillor Bromwich.
Just on a levity, a little bit of levity here. There is such a thing as a killer bullfrog.
Killer, isn't it killer hornets and killer bullfrogs now?
Killer bullfrogs. Google it.
Okay. All right. I think we've just about gone through everything in your current presentation, Mr. Delamater, but I do still have the original one, and you did bring up questions regarding Little Bark Bay development, and that these slides that were originally given to us are now part of this public agenda. So I think I would like to ask the applicant, who was also the developer for Little Bark Bay, if you could speak to the shoreline at Little Bark Bay. And I do believe you received copies of the presentation that was on the agenda. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So it poses a question about whether or not what is said is actually being done, and I'd like you to be able to address that.
The conditions at Little Bark Bay are significantly different than those at Chippewa. Lots 8 through 12 had been very, very heavily logged. And if you want to see what that looks like, drive along Babinski Road. And that's what we had to develop. So we did have the very clear objective to preserve every valuable tree that we could do for the value of the lot and the privacy and the enjoyment of the potential purchasers. Unfortunately, there were very few available on those lots because of the overlogging. And that was clearly outlined with pictorial evidence in the landscape plan that was submitted as part of Little Bark Bay. And it's something that we just had to deal with. Unfortunately, that we didn't have a far more mature stand of trees on all of the property as we do at the west end. And those lots will be fully treed and completely in compliance with all of the environmental protections that were agreed to.
Okay, so and Little Bark Bay then is therefore different from Chippewa Shores. How? Could you explain that?
Yes, well, it was subject to clear cutting of the land down to the water. The original owner owned the land actually well under the water. That occurred when the Bark Lake Dam back flooded about 50% of the area. And Little Bark Bay was created through a back flood. So the original owner owned the land all the way under the water out to a small lake that was already present called Scotts Lake. And it was logged extensively because it was not really used for recreation. And it was done several times. And the last logging that was done was a virtual clear cut of any marketable timber and a very large residual mess was left. And then it became populated very quickly with the dreaded poplar saplings that have no value, in fact, have to be removed if you're going to have any environmental protection for the use of the land. So Little Bark was entirely different. Chippewa Shores, there has been some development, especially down the river, where a campground operation was established by the previous owner. And that's what makes some of this shoreline issue somewhat moot, because if you walk down there, you're going to find it's wide open and it was used for camping. However, there are many, many very valuable and mature trees available on virtually every lot that we are going to have available at Chippewa Shores, and they will be preserved as best possible for also, as you pointed out, the individuals who are going to purchase these lots, or actually Councillor Bromwich pointed out, they're going to want to keep all the value that they can. And these are going to be high-end development parcels, and there is not going to be a wholesale sort of change of the landscape. What can be preserved will be far more readily than what was available to be preserved at Little Bark Bay.
Okay, thank you. So there is a definite difference between the two properties. Councillor Poplinski, I am aware that you have to leave. I just wanted to give you a final chance. If you have a minute, is there any further questions you have or concerns you have that you want to express at this point? I am aware you do have to leave at 3 temporarily. Your mic is off, but there. Oh, no, it keeps flipping. Try again.
Okay, how's that?
That's good. Yes, did you?
Okay, no, a lot of the answers have been given, and I appreciate that very much. And so I have no further questions at the moment, and I'll be hopefully back within the next 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll sign on when I come back.
Okay, that would be fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you kindly.
Okay, so I did want to make sure he got that opportunity because I get messages while I'm dealing with this, and I had been informed he did have to leave. Now, is there any other member of council who has any comments, questions, anything for Mr. De La Matter, anything for the applicant? Please, this is your opportunity to get any concerns or questions addressed or have discussion. No, I think I'm seeing that we're all good. I guess then I'm going to thank you, Mr. Dillamatter, and Friends of the Madawaska Watershed for the presentation today, for the information you provided, for the clarification. And, you know, you put yourself on the hot seat, and that's not an easy thing to do. Certainly, I recognize what that's like.
Oh, I know.
I empathize completely, and I do appreciate that you have taken the time to fully inform us about your concerns and to, you know, participate in this public process one last time before council does consider the zoning bylaw amendment and has their discussion a little later in the meeting about that.
Okay, one of the things that I can't resist pointing out is that even in this discussion, the effect of the development on the recreational crowding of Green Lake has not been brought up. I'm finally able to describe it, but I'll just remind you to discuss it, please, when you look at it. And I will have my PowerPoint presentation online in the next 10 minutes. So if Gwen wants to download it for you to look at later, it will be available.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. That's very important because it was subtly different from what's in the package, and I don't want any points to.
Actually, quite a bit different, as because I spent 2 extra days just doing that. So, but
But you understand every nuance of it, so.
Well, maybe.
But you're gonna have it. So anyways, thank you for that. I'd like to thank the applicant and wow, the entire enormous group of support personnel and Mr. Cheeseman. I'd like to thank, and actually the municipality's lawyer, Bill Instance, did also join us at one point. I'd like to thank everyone for their input, for you know, being willing to field questions on the fly and you know, provide knowledgeable answers to us. That's super important, and I do appreciate that as well. Now, did any of the applicants or Mr. Cheeseman or Mr. Instance or any of the consultants have anything further to add at this point?
Mayor, I would like to quickly address the recreational crowding issue that Mr. Dillamatter just referred to. The recreation crowding assessment deals with the number of allowable watercraft on Green Lake, does not refer to the number of developable lots. Under the model, 2 boats per lot are allocated. With that in mind, with the number of existing lots, there could not be another 26 boats launched by Chippewa Shores without creating a major recreational crowding issue. What we have done is to reduce the horsepower allowed on Green Lake to address that issue. And as it sits now, there really aren't any boats on Green Lake. That model is theoretical. At Chippewa Shores, we put a couple of boats in there right now so we can do some fishing and enjoy the lake. But when the condominium license of the SRA is complete, the 10 horsepower restriction on boats on Green Lake is what the recreational crowding assessment recommendation for resolution is, and that is being followed. It's not to restrict the number of lots, it's to restrict the number of boats. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And that's good to hear.
Okay, council, have any questions on that? Okay, not seeing any. Then is there, okay, Tracy. Maybe Tracy, you could introduce yourself for, I don't know if Mr. Dillamatter knows who you are.
Will do. Thank you, Mayor Love. My name's Tracy Zander. I'm the planner from Zander Plan. I've been working on this project for quite a few years. I'll just provide a couple of brief comments from a planning perspective. Most of the discussion today has been around the natural heritage and so on, but wanted to just note what council has before them on the agenda today is the zoning amendment to implement the zoning for the uses on the property. And as we've heard, there's been extensive review, study, peer review, analysis given to this site. I think it's been demonstrated through all of those documents and reviews that the proposal fully conforms with the official plan and the provincial policy statement, and I think represents good planning in my opinion. And as you've heard from Neil, and I agree, this is really down zoning. The current zoning on the property, and the majority of this property is tourist commercial. There could be quite a lot of development on this property if a property owner wanted to build out a tourist commercial resort. What you have before you really represents down zoning to a much less intense land use, and with extensive protections through the EP zones on different parts of this property to implement the recommendations that came from the study. So I just wanted to offer that kind of planning comment, since what you do have before you is a zoning amendment today. So I'm also happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Okay. Ooh, don't know what that was, but any member of council have any questions for Tracy as the planner? Yeah, I'm not seeing any. Tracy, thank you so much for being here and listening in. Is there anything further from any of the other applicants or from Mr. Cheeseman, I guess? Mr. Cheeseman, did you want to speak?
I would just point out that we also have to, at the county level, issue the draft conditions, draft approval, well, conditions of draft approval, which have already been circulated to council, and we'll undertake to get those out as soon as we can, so that these two applications are proceeding relatively consistently wise. The zoning bylaw amendment can be appealed. The plan of subdivision decision cannot be appealed. Thank you.
Correct. There is the option to appeal the zoning bylaw amendment to LPAT, and any member of the public who wishes to have more information on that, I'm going to suggest that they probably could contact Mr. Cheeseman and Sue. So you
I just wanted to clarify as well. Mr. Cheeseman forwarded a recommended resolution to pass prior to the bylaw 2020-68, which was pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act. Council has determined that no further public notice is required in respect to changes that were made to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment after the public meeting of August 29, 2019.
Okay, and the changes made were changes that further enhance the environmental protection, I do believe. Okay.
Provided that you actually write in the width of the buffer zone, the bylaw the copy of the bylaw that I had no width in it at all.
I could just speak to that, perhaps.
Please,
Maybe,
Mr. Cheeseman.
Neil or Tracy. Doug, what we did there is the buffers are built into those zones. So those zones are based on a plan of survey, reference plan of survey that is mentioned in the bylaw.
Okay.
So the applicant went out and surveyed the wetland and the applicable buffers. So that's all built into that zone, and that therefore we did not need to reference 30 meters.
Good.
Okay,
well,
so they're surveyed on the ground.
Yes,
that's fine. I didn't want you to approve a 1 meter wide buffer. That's all.
No, it's as surveyed, I believe. So, okay, with that, I'm going to thank everyone for participating in our delegations and presentations this afternoon. It took a little longer than we normally allow for delegations, but I think there was a lot of worthwhile information and questions and answers here, and it was super important that we engaged in that and made certain that council had heard the concerns of the Friends of the Madawaska Watershed and had any additional questions they had answered as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I don't expect you all to stay for the rest of this meeting. It's a council agenda, and we're going to get to work and get on with our agenda, but thank you for being here. And if you want to stay, you can. It's always nice to have an audience.
thank you.
Sue?
I just wanted to clarify prior to the municipal solicitor leaving, if council had any concerns they wanted to address in close as it pertains to questions of this presentation, and or if they had any questions now they wanted to ask prior to considering the bylaw.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions or concerns. There is a matter in closed. I'll leave it to you to determine if you think we need our solicitor here for that matter, which is not this. It's something completely different. But, and if you could connect with Mr. Instance on that, Sue, if you feel we will need him again.
Okay, thank you. Just want to clarify.
Yeah, no, I think we're good on this at this point. So I'd like to carry on with our meeting then and move forward with the confirmation of the minutes. First, we have the special council meeting minutes of June 2nd, 2020. The recommendation I'm going to read is that the special council meeting minutes of June 2nd, 2020 be approved as amended. And I will explain to council why. Because there is a specific statement, as I read at the beginning of this meeting, that has not been put into the minutes verbatim. I did provide that to Gwen Dombrowski. My apologies for not providing it sooner. So we would like to amend the beginning of the minutes to reflect the statement that the mayor reads, and that statement was developed to ensure that the public was aware about why they're not able to participate in person at these special council meetings. So that would be the amendment, and you heard me read that at the beginning of this meeting. Does council have any concerns with that? Not seeing any concerns. Is there any other amendments that we need to look at for the special council meeting minutes of June 2nd? Sue?
Yes, if I may, just some clarification coming out of closed, that it be amended to state that the direction was given for Tim Harmer to provide a response to letters received from Roger Paul.
Okay, so that clarification was in relation to the agenda item that was listed on the in-camera agenda, which was in regards to Amphippa.
Correct.
Okay. So that clarification would be put in these minutes as well. Does council have a concern with that? Okay, not seeing a concern. So as I said, the recommendation is that the special council meeting minutes for June 2nd, 2020 be approved as amended. Could I get a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Bromwich, seconded by Councillor Schulist. All those in favor? And that's carried. Our next minutes are the public meeting minutes of February 4th, 2020. Again, I would ask it be as amended because what I read at the beginning of the public meeting was not captured accurately. Again, my fault for not providing that to Gwen promptly. So it would be amended to reflect exactly what was read at the beginning of the public meeting. I'm not sure if there was any other amendments to that one, Sue. I've lost track of where I'm at.
No, I don't have any.
Okay, let me just verify. I apologize, council. I got 2 computers on the go and a bunch of papers too. And it's been a long day. Okay, 5.2. 5.2. Give me 1 second. Okay, no, I don't think there was anything else other than that. So the recommendation is that the public meeting minutes for February 4th, 2020 be approved as amended. And could I get a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Wilmer, seconded by Councillor Bromwich. Did anyone else have any errors or omissions on these minutes? I'm not seeing anything. All those in favor? And that's carried. Okay, next we have the special council meeting minutes of June 9th, 2020. Again, the same amendment, I believe at the beginning, that needs to be done. So the recommendation is that the special council meeting minutes for June 9th, 2020 be approved as amended. 73. Okay, sorry, and I will move by Councillor Bromwich, seconded by Councillor Schulist. And just give me a second, gentlemen, to make sure there were no other changes. Okay, there is one other amendment I'd like to propose on page 76 for council's consideration. It says Mayor Love requested that the road allowance remains open and that the parking does not intervene with residents' private land. I'd just like to clarify, Mayor Love requested staff to ensure that the road remains open. It is a road, not a road allowance. and that the parking does not interfere with access to the residents on the road. And this was in relation to Meadowlark Lane parking. I just wanted to be clear. It's not a road allowance. It is actually a municipally maintained road. Is council okay with that amendment to clarify that statement? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And also on that same section of that page, you'll note in what you received, it says moved by councillor, seconded by councillor, and Gwen is going to, I don't know if Gwen knows who moved and seconded that motion, if she's researched that, but I did identify that to her, and they will be, the councillors who moved and seconded it would be included in these minutes. Anyone have a concern with her doing that? She can check the video. Okay. So those would be all of the amendments. Does anyone else have any amendments to this set of minutes? Not seeing any. Therefore, all those in favor. And that's carried. Okay, next is the special council meeting minutes of June 25th, 2020. And I'm trying to remember if we need to amend the beginning of these. I think the beginning of these. Oh, no, I'm not sure, Gwen, I'm sorry. I think the beginning of these needs to be amended as well to include the statement. And the minutes that council received, there was a bit of a formatting problem on page 85 and 86 as it related to in camera and return to open session. You'll notice there was some confusion there, and that sometimes occurs because the software is not that is used to produce the minutes isn't easy to address. Sometimes it doesn't want to do what you're trying to get it to do. So Gwen, maybe you could confirm for me that you tidied up that section of the minutes so it reflects typically how the minutes are presented.
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, so you can do that. So it wouldn't be any change in the content, it's just a change in how it's arranged.
Yes.
Okay, so with those amendments, now I'm lost. Did I get a mover? Moved by Councillor Bromwich, seconded by Councillor Wilmer. Was there any further amendments to the June 25th meeting? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. Okay. Next are the public meeting minutes of June 2nd, 2020. And the recommendation, I can find them. Sorry, I've lost them. Apologize. That's it. The recommendation is that the public meeting minutes of June 2nd, 2020 be approved as amended. And on page 90, it's going to read what I'm going to request that council amend. On page 90, section 27, questions discussion by council. The minutes say Mayor Love noted that a land division consent will be required. I'm just going to find what actually I said. Mayor Love noted that this zoning bylaw amendment is a condition of the consent granted by the Renfrew County Land Division Committee. Council recalls I referred to that in relation to this particular consent, and I'd like it noted appropriately. So that's the only amendment I'm asking here. Is there any other amendments that council or concerns or errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. And finally, we have the Lakeshore Tennis Club meeting minutes of May 17th and May 21st, 2020. And the recommendation is that the Lakeshore Tennis Club meeting minutes for May 17th and May 21st, 2020 are accepted as presented. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Bromwich, seconded by Councillor Schulist. Any discussion on these minutes? Looks to me like they're doing a good job of ensuring that they are mindful of COVID-19 and they are still providing good recreation to people who are physically distancing and observing hand washing and careful handling of things. So I was really pleased to see that they really did a good job of ensuring that their members and any guests they have are being protected during the COVID pandemic. That would be my only comment. Good on them. Anything from council? We're good? Okay, all those in favor? And that's carried. Any business arising out of the minutes? Okay, seeing none. We'll move to municipal reports. First, we have the Combermere Mission House Museum Summer 2020 report, and it's a report by Stephanie. I'm wondering if Stephanie can join us.
See you, but they'll hear you.
There she is. Hi, Stephanie. Take it away, Stephanie.
Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to send a little bit of an update. So I've been in contact with the Mission House Museum group, and although they were hopeful they could open, they decided they weren't going to this year with all the restrictions that were ongoing. So I wanted to make council as well as the public aware that they are collecting any kind of memorabilia or anything that they can put in their museum. So if anybody has anything or suggestions for them, just to contact them. But that was all the report was for.
Memorabilia, not sale stuff.
Is that a good word?
That was what made me have a moment of laugh, because I guess one man's memorabilia is somebody else's junk. So obviously they're not just going to take everything. They're going to be very careful about that. Any comments or questions from council for Stephanie on that report? Okay, everybody's good with that. Our next report, Councillor Poplinski did declare on this report, and I do believe Councillor Poplinski is not here. He has left, although he does show on the screen. He is not going to be participating because he did declare. So 7.2 is student positions for 2020, and I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to speak to that.
So I just wanted to send the report to council to let them know who we've hired for the summer and what it is that we have them doing. So these are all the positions that we filled this year for 2020 with all the student grants that we were able to secure. We still at this moment do have one position still available. We're still hopeful to fill that position, but I'm not sure we will, but we'll see.
So we have employment available for a student.
We do. Anybody under the age of 30.
Well, that's not me. Councillor Bromwich, obviously that's not him either. Two of us are out, but that's good to know. I hope that message gets out there that we do have employment available for a student. And it's the parks watering attendant position?
It is, yeah.
Okay. So, get that message out there. We can hire one more student. They should, Stephanie, are you still taking applications for that position then?
The application, we had posted it, it ended again on Monday. We haven't had it posted right now, but I will post it again if I need to. I do have staff from the arena that's filling in. So it's working, but it would be easier with another student. So we're going to see how it goes for the next little bit, but yeah.
Okay, no, that would be great. I think if we can employ our students in these difficult times, it's not easy to find a job, or some students may have health issues and they're looking for a job that's not where they're in contact in the service industry with the public. And I don't think this one would be one that you would come into close contact with the public. Somebody gets too close, you can water them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's good to know. Okay. Any questions from council? Comments? Are we good? We're good with that? Okay. Thank you. Our next one is Flowers, Recreation and Parks Update 2020, and it is again Stephanie. So I'll turn it over to you.
So just with the flowers, they've all arrived. They look beautiful. The Barry's Bay, Combermere, and Wilno, all the parks have been, looks like everything's all put together. We did order the watering baskets, and the initial opinion, or sorry, watering baskets, the self-watering baskets, I guess is the right word. And the initial reports from staff are sounding like 3 to 4 days right now. They're able to sort of just do a quick top water, and we're letting them see how much further we can push without the meter going too dry. So they seem to be working. And then we also purchased the Kubota this year, which is in operation, where we don't see any issues with that so far. But so the rest of the report was just a quick operations update with regards to washrooms and the tennis courts and the railway station. And of course, the news with the required masks coming next week. I'll be keeping up to date with what's going on there, because that'll be all required at those places as well. So The only thing that I put a note on here for was hand sanitizers have gone missing in the facilities from time to time. But we're hoping that people respect the fact that they're open and that that stuff stays. The provincial closure still affects the playgrounds, and caution tape and signage is present on the playground, so they are still closed. Besides that, I don't think I had anything else for you.
Okay, thank you. Sue?
Yes, I was talking to Stephanie this morning about a recent grant that we have a very short timeline on, and we had referenced in a previous report about the the play structures at Lakeshore Park. And so I had mentioned to Stephanie maybe to talk about it during unfinished business, but if she may just maybe speak to it now.
Sure.
Yes.
So the Enabling Accessibility Grant has opened, and it's in the amount of $100,000 up to that we can apply for. So I'm working right now with our playground supplier to see if I can come up with something that will suit. And if I can, I'm hoping to apply for that grant that we can use for this play structure. I'm hoping within the next week to meet with the Barry's Bay Recreation Committee. And this has all just come down in the last couple days. So I'm hoping that this all works out. But the grant application is similar to the grant that I applied for the floating wheelchair. So I'm kind of familiar with what their requirements are. So I'm hoping that it'll all follow suit. I have a phone call. Well, I was supposed to be on a phone call at 2 o'clock today with the grant lady, or with the playground lady, but I will speak with her after. So.
Okay, thank you. That's exciting news. Councillor Wilmer?
Stephanie, is that 100% funding then? Or are we responsible? It is. Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
Absolutely perfect. Couldn't get better. It would be nice to be able to replace the play structure that was not safe with a safe new play structure that is also handicap accessible. That would be, that would be amazing. So Stephanie, I know you do a good job of writing grants and you've been fairly successful with that. So please, I'm any no's from council, please proceed and apply, and we will hopefully cross our fingers that we get it. Councillor Bromwich.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just wanted to say I had a chance last night, later in the afternoon, to drive through Barry's Bay after dropping off our little babies, and I saw the flowers. The town looks gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, very impressive. And anybody that's listening to us today, just go for a drive and see what's going on in Barry's Bay and area, because it's just gorgeous. Yeah, I was gobsmacked. Wow. Well done.
They are beautiful.
Good job. And a lot of the work to plant the flowers and arrange the flowers is done by volunteers. So we do need to acknowledge, and I will forget a group if I start naming off. I will just say in general that work is mainly done by volunteers. And I don't know if the BIA actually does some of the work as well, but I know that so they're all volunteering to make this a much more beautiful place, and that's exciting. They're doing a good job.
They are. And the two students or the two staff that we have watering this year are new to the watering regime. So I think so far everybody's pretty impressed with the way that the flowers look. So it's working out.
Absolutely great. Thank you. Now, is there any questions for Stephanie on any of the information or any discussion points? Councillor Wilmer.
No, I just wanted to make a comment too, and I agree with Councillor Bromwich. And I think one of the things, we've certainly had a hot summer. Last year, I think our baskets were dead by this time. So it's so much better, and whatever we're doing now, we're doing it right, and we've really learned how to do it well. So thank you to all of, and Mayor Love, you're right, a lot of volunteers effort goes into this along with our staff, and but it certainly is worthwhile when you drive around and see the results.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Wilmer. And to the public, Councillor Wilmer has a puppy, so the sounds that you hear when he's addressing the meeting are the joys of the puppy that's very excited. So just so people know what those sounds are. They're puppy sounds.
Well, if my computer goes flying off, I've had to plug it in because we're running low and he keeps pulling on the cord. So you may lose me completely.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll be able to rejoin us. All right. So we'll move on then to municipal office building renovations. And I do believe I saw Mr. Poplinski, Andy.
Is Andy around?
We can't see you or hear you, but, oh, there we are. We can see you. And we just need, there we go. So did you want to speak to this report, please?
Well, again, I can't remember. I apologize. The last council meeting direction was given to have the 2 interior doors installed. So since then, I was also directed, I apologize, to speak to the designer. So I did speak to the designer. The designer has advised that we possibly may want to do it as a phase-in period. So along with the interior doors, both the basement and the upstairs, we would also provide access into the CAO's office through the interior of the hallway instead of where it is, just block the door off. Also, accessibility counter at the front desk where the people do come up. It is something that is required, but we didn't know if we were going to do it now or later. So he has advised that's something we could possibly do as well. The other thing would be to provide a door on the secure side of the office, the interior of the office, into the main office, front desk where our support staff is, the administrative staff, and also for our taxation department to create a small office, which was part of the original plan. Just for doing these interior works, wanted to know if we all wanted to be on part of the phase 1. So that's something for council to give direction so we can proceed with it, or just stay with the interior doors and we'll carry on from there. So that was one of the reasons why we brought this to council today.
Okay, so in the design plans that council has seen and had some input into, these would be things that are static. They're not changing as far as we know. They would be needing to be done anyways, regardless of any other shifting around that occurred.
Yes.
Or any other investment in heating and cooling. These things need to be done.
Yes.
Council have any comments or questions for Mr. Poplinski about what's proposed in the report? No? Okay. Then I guess, Sue, could you give a recommendation? Not sure. Sue?
Sorry, I was having issues. So the recommendation would be that council grant approval to staff to proceed with the RFP process for municipal office renovations outlined in the staff report titled Municipal Office Building Renovations presented on July 7th.
Okay, so could I get a mover for that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Bromwich, seconded by Councillor Wilmer. Is there any discussion on the recommendation? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that's carried. And Sue, I apologize, and Gwen, I apologize. I didn't have Sue read all of the recommendations for these municipal reports. Do we need these recommendations? None of the other ones were covering anything new. They were just information. Sue?
No, they were just approving the report.
Okay, so you don't need me to do each of them?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. This one stood out for me. I think I'm getting tired. Stood out for me because it does refer to new direction to staff. Okay. All right, here we go. We are now at bylaws. Bylaw 2020-63 is regarding a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment, adding section 11.3A, tours and commercial exception 1, TC-E1. A retail store shall be a permitted use. 2672599, Ontario Incorporated. Mateus, I can't say this poor man's name. Suti, PSU 2020-03.
Question for the chair.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, I just wonder if council would indulge in a 10-minute recess. I do have a call in to Bill, and possibly by then Councillor Poplinski might be back.
Yes, absolutely. I would indulge a recess because I was just reading the intro to this, but I figured before we actually got into the recommendation, we would need to have some significant discussion as a council. So
Can we say 3:45?
Absolutely. If that's okay with council, would someone move that we break until 3:45? Moved by Councillor Bronwich, seconded by Councillor Wilmer. All those in favor? And that's carried. And poor Councillor Schulist, his internet is very slow today.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm
I have
here.
to wait. I have to wait for the hand to come up. It takes a while.